for the opportunity for us to put our point of views forward today. Quite frankly, I want to take us back to the Darren Hicks story as far as transport goes, back to 18th of August 2014. Darren was a truck driver working for Cleanaway, driving an 8,000 litre truck. He was involved in a terrible tragedy at the bottom of the southeastern freeway, killing a couple of people and almost lost his own life. Thomas Spies, Jacqueline Byrne lost their life, and Louise Crompton, she was seriously injured, and Darren nearly lost his life. And as a consequence, he had his leg amputated. I'm pleased to say that Darren's got on with his life and living a pretty good life now. But he was a 28-year-old lad at that stage, and he was working for Trans-Pacific at that time, which we now know as Cleanaway. 6 days earlier, he started with them as labour hire. He spent a 2-day course before that getting his driver's licence, his truck driver's licence. He'd never driven a manual down the freeway, manual truck. From my understanding, Darren on the flat area for a couple of days with Cleanaway, or Cleanaway at the time, was quite efficient and good at his job. And they said to him the night before that we're going to send you up the hill, and there's some work up the hill to be done the next day. And he had a buddy driver with him and he'd be fine. Well, the next morning he's coming to work, different truck. As I said, he'd never driven a manual. The buddy driver called in sick and they decided to still go ahead. They sent him up the hill. Lots of things that day that really consequented what happened. The driver didn't turn up. When there's a sewage pumping station up in the hills that was contaminated, so they had to bring the fully laden truck down to the other side of Adelaide. The truck, this 30-year-old vehicle. It was reported to us that three weeks before, the mechanics that were looking after the vehicle at that time had told Cleanaway that the brakes were faulty and needed fixed and needed to be put off the road. Our story is that was ignored. And as we know, the catastrophe, the brakes failed coming down the bottom of the freeway, and Darren had the tragedy of collecting those cars and the tragic events that have occurred. He was a member of the union and we supported him through the process. And I happened to sit into one of his police interviews when he was in hospital. And it's an experience that I'll never forget. You could see in his eyes the fear and the inexperience that he was displaying through the process. He didn't really, listening to him, he probably didn't do anything wrong. And probably in essence, the criminal charges been dropped, so that happened, but the brakes failed and he cleaned up everybody. So, and I've got to say this, Darren's story wasn't an accident. It was inevitable in this industry, the way we're going, that something like this would happen. Caused by serious issues in our industry. We know this goes on. Corners are cut on safety just to save money. And this is a result of the direct pressure that companies place on drivers by the wealthy climbers at the top of the supply chain. The bottom line is the clients. Most of them don't do transport because they know the cost of it. The reason they contracted it out is for saving money, and then they put pressure on the companies to do the job at a cut price and cut the consequences that we see that are out there. And they try and say, well, it's not our fault. They're supposed to have all these things in place, but unfortunately it doesn't happen. Look, we need to get to the bottom point. Who profited from this cutting corners of this particular accident? Obviously the councils in this case are the people that are responsible, because that's what the main user that they will be using up the hills. Clients have all the power. And as I said, the reason clients don't do transport is because they know how much it costs. And we've seen the antics of, companies like Audi in the supply chain, asking drivers to do excessive hours and push the speed and unrealistic deadline. And when truck drivers spoke up to protest against that, Audi tried to stop them in the courts. They were unsuccessful, but this is the sort of thing that the clients think that they can do. They think they've got all the control and no responsibility. And we know, I think everybody in this room, or if you don't know, you should know, driving a truck is the most deadly industry to be in. Workplace deaths are treated as car accidents. Car accidents is not as workplace deaths. They're not investigated half the time properly. So we don't actually some of the time get to the real causes of the problem. Now, we did have a solution to this called the RRAT that was introduced by the previous Labor government. But this government in 2016 repealed that legislation and abolished it. And I'll be quite frank, I'll talk about my little patch in South Australia. 64 South Australians have been killed since that was repealed. 15 drivers have been killed. Now, I've had and it's a horrible experience, I've had a chance to sit with some of those family members, the tragedy of losing their partner, their son, their daughter, and it's absolutely horrific. And once again, sitting with Darren Hicks, it brings it really home. These are good, genuine people, smart people, that if they're given the right things to do and the right tools and the right training, they would do it safe and they do it well. The solutions really are there. We need a federal government that wants to take action industry-wide. We need to have standards that are across the board, that are enforceable. We need to make sure that everybody in the industry, from whether it's the contractor that owns the trucks, to the owner-driver, to the driver itself that's working for him, is paid a decent, safe rate of pay and is not forced to skip breaks, to speed, just so they can keep the contract. Contracts needed to be awarded on who does it the best and who does it the safest, not who does it the cheapest. We need a national training and education pathways to ensure proper standards in the industry. And if I get real focus, if we talk about this Southeastern Freeway, one particular major company, K&S Freighters, years ago, their rule was, very simply, if you hadn't had your truck licence for 3 years, you didn't go up or down that hill as a driver. You might have come up and down as a passenger if you never went as a driver, but you had the skills and the experience to navigate that hill. And what we see as the answer, we need legislation from the federal government which is properly able to be properly enforced. And quite frankly, we need action now, because every day someone in the transport industry, and sometimes more than one per day, dies. And that's totally unsatisfactory. So I thank the committee for hearing me. I'm glad that now we've got someone that seriously wants to do something about this industry, and I'm glad to be part of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Now, to Peter or George, firstly, Frank, are you online? Mr. Black? No, not yet. Okay, so Ian, I'll come to Peter and to George. Do they wish to add any opening statements before we go to questions?
Peter,
Good.
we got Frank there.
Are you there? Okay, just welcome the opportunity. Firstly, Mr. Black, if you could please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today for the Hansard purposes.
Yes, my name's Frank Siriaco, but in the industry I'm known as Frank Black, and I appear as an owner-driver.
Thank you. And for those who don't know, I don't know what rock they may have been under, and Frank and I have known each other for many, many years. So welcome, Frank. Thanks for joining us. So I'll now give the opportunity to either Frank, Peter or George to add any comments. Frank, you just came on, but Ian just gave a rundown on some brief history about how unsafe the industry's been. Training issues, rates are always a real problem. What he views as the South Australian branch of the TWU is what is needed from government points of view, but I'll hear from the drivers and then we'll ask some questions. So I'll give you the opportunity, Frank, to listen to where Peter and George are going, and then I'll come to you. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll lead on to Peter first, Senator.
Thank you.
Well, Hello, my name is Peter English, and thank you for having me here today. I have been driving trucks for 30 years and have worked for various companies. I'm here today because I'm tired of seeing drivers putting their lives at risk day in and day out, and I know only the government is going to be able to fix our industry problem. The reason I want to tell you why the government needs to act is because we've been trying to fix these things on our own and can't. I'll share a quick example with you. I worked at Lindsay's, one of the major transport companies in the country for 4 years. Lindsay showed me how bad things can get when companies are allowed to tighten the screws on drivers with no accountability or concern for safety. I've seen drivers having to pull 14-hour shift runs with no questions asked. The company targeting those who speak out about safety issues or work pressures. Forklifts zipping around the yard at double the allowed speed. Happy to go into this more detail, but in a nutshell, Lindsay were just dodgy and dangerous. After 4 years at Lindsay's, I was a delegate and one of the few who tried to stand up for safe and fair working conditions for drivers in the yard. After sticking my neck out, I was subject to relentless bullying and forced to leave the company. I suffered mental health issues and I left the company broken. The problem is much bigger than Lindsay's. When Lindsay and companies like it are able to behave in an unsafe way, it means that they can deliver stuff cheaper and undercut companies with safe standards. And when major clients like Audi keep awarding contracts to Lindsay's, despite them having such a horrible record, it only creates a bigger incentive for other companies to follow suit. So the solutions, I want to see a safe industry which allows drivers to make a respectable living without having to put themselves in harm's way. To do this, we need to make sure we are paid enough and work pressures cannot get out of hand. Overwork and underpayments is a life or death matter for us drivers, and we need government and companies to recognise that. Thank you for listening to me.
You're on mute, Glenn. You're on mute, Glenn.
Sorry, broke my own golden rule. Sorry about that. Peter, thank you for that. And I do have questions for you later, but George, I'll just give you the opportunity and then I'll go to Frank.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is George Drysdale, and I wish to thank you all for having me here today. I've been a bus driver for 3 years working across Adelaide bus network. My father was also a bus driver for many years throughout the bus network across Australia. I'm here today because I'm tired of seeing drivers putting their lives at risk day in, day out, and the only people that can solve the problems that we as drivers have is the government. We can't fix them alone. We can, though, work together to resolve these issues. Some experience between the stress of work and under tight timetables, lack of driver protection, road rage, passenger violence, handling fare evasion. I've just seen in the 3 years that I've been a driver, the industry deteriorate. Also discussing with my father. Verbal and physical abuse on our buses has reached beyond crisis point. The TWU bus survey, which we carried out earlier this year, showed that 40% of the drivers feel that their job has become more dangerous. 62% of the drivers reported being verbally abused. 7% reported being physically assaulted. I can say to everyone listening today that those figures have gone up in a short period of time. Yet we're not given any resources or tools that we need to properly respond to incidents on our buses. I am in contact with people interstate, and I'm not just talking about Adelaide bus drivers, I'm talking about Australia-wide. Doesn't matter which state or territory we go to. I'm shocked by the violence I deal with myself every day. I'll share some examples with you all. Early this month, one of our female co-workers, been in the industry for a long time, was threatened while doing her job. She had a pair of scissors held at her throat. Disgusting. On the 28th of May, a bus driver was punched in the face and hit with a beer bottle across his eye, leaving him injured and unable to work. It's pretty hard to talk about these issues. It was only 4 years ago that we all saw a tragic murder of Manmeet Sharma, who was burnt to death in Maruka as he was behind the wheel of a Brisbane City Council bus. That is as fresh today as it was back then. Discussions are still held within the depot regarding that particular matter whenever anything serious happens. As early as yesterday, that is still brought up. Instead of action, we're seeing governments stick their head in the sand and refuse to act. There's simply not enough security or money in the system to even pursue practical low-cost solutions. It's something that we could all work together to resolve at a very little cost. Bus drivers are getting fed up of leaving the industry. Those who stay tend to be accustomed to the abuse, and it's just seen part of their job. Solutions. The problem tearing our industry apart is the government that tender out our bus contracts only care about squeezing companies for the lowest bidder. No different to a lot of other areas. And bid for profit margins, these bus companies have to make savings. Where are these savings going to come from? It has to start with conditions, pay, safety, maintenance. If anyone else has got any other ideas where these companies can make the savings, I'm only too happy to listen. Why should a bus company implement a full driver protection system or add security on problem routes? It means that's going to wipe their entire profit out. There's very little profit in running this, so there goes their profit. We need a strong national industry standard that means drivers' conditions and safety for all on the road and in the bus is prioritised regardless of which company owns the service, which company runs the contract, which country, state or territory you're working as a bus driver in Australia. Again, the governments are the ones that have the power. We can help, but at the end of the day, they can ensure that things are changed. This can start when all buses rolled out across Australia are equipped with a driver protection system, a proper driver protection system, not a band-aid fix. Thank you for listening to me today.
All right, thank you very much, George. And we will have questions. Frank.
Yes. Hi, Glenn. And to those of you that don't know me, I'm Frank Sidiaco, better known in the industry as Frank Black. I've been an owner driver now for 30 years, currently working in line haul, general freight. But over the years, I've been across multiple sectors, including wharf work and container work and so on. And like the other speakers, I'm sick to death of watching people get killed. I'm sick to death of watching families fall apart because of the tough conditions that's imposed on them through this industry. It sickens you to see that people say, that driver was fatigued, but they don't ask why. They don't ask why is he fatigued? Is there someone pushing him? Is he greedy? What is it? 9 times out of 10 you'll find that there's a bit of a push, or there's an unspoken pressure that he needs to keep going just to make a living. Being an owner driver is not that easy. You sort of got to contend for work, right? You contend for work. Now, some of us know our costings, so we put in a reasonable price, but some don't, and they'll put in a low price, right? Just recently, I had the ACCC come down on me because I do a column in the Owner Driver magazine. And I suggested that these companies that are trying to push down rates, I suggested that owner drivers should not allow that to happen. They're low enough. We need to operate safety. But it appears that the ACCC is more concerned about competition rather than safety. Much like the ATA. Years ago, I joined the ATA, thinking, okay, we're going to bring our issues to the attention of the peak body for transport. And maybe this peak body will be able to do something to bring some sense to our industry. But it didn't take me long to work out that the ATA is part of the problem. They're the problem that try to keep rates low, and they don't really care. All they're worried about is for companies, as long as the companies can get access to their bigger combination vehicles, safety is not really a concern for them, I don't think. What we need in this industry is what we had in 2016. We need something like the safety, the RSRT, that was able to set a minimum rate. That would have kept people safe. But again, we had the greedy people of the industry, such as the ATA and that, all come up and protest against it, and the government fell right in behind them and abolished probably the best thing we had in this industry. So the reality is we need something like that back again. We need proper training so that owner drivers do understand their costings. And when they quote for jobs, they know how to quote. We need some sort of entry level into this industry and not just have it open as Rafferty rules. Doing things like that protect everybody. It doesn't just protect the owner drivers. It protects the community as well. I hear people turn around and say, oh, that accident wasn't the truck driver's fault. How do they really know? If a driver's driving tired, you don't know whether if he was a bit more alert, he may have been able to avoid that accident. So I think the government needs to get their head out of the sand, stop worrying about competition, and turn around and put in some sort of safety systems in this industry, and turn around and listen to the TWU and the owner drivers of this country. Thank you for listening to me. Have I lost you?
So Frank, sorry mate, thank you for that. And I just want to, before I go to Senator McDonald, I just want to clarify a few points there with Frank before I come back after Senator McDonald and ask some questions. Frank, you mentioned where the ACCC came down upon you with like a ton of bricks because you had actually said, you just forgot to tell everyone, when you said now's not the time to let the top end of the supply chain screw the living daylights out of the owner drivers, keep your rates, stay solid, it was because of the advent of COVID. That's why, and I read your article, Frank.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. Yes.
Yes, and I just wanted to reiterate that for others that might not know that. And I'd also like to reiterate that through some fine work of Senator Tony Sheldon, there was a hookup last week, video hookup with myself, Mr. Sims and some of his crew from the ACCC, where they had said to us very clearly that there was these are my words, not the ACCC's, there was an overzealous enforcer who just got carried away by writing that ridiculously threatening letter to you. So you're not going to jail for 10 years and all that rubbish. So that's one good thing.
But that is a good thing, Glenn. Yeah. And I appreciate what's gone down there. But still, what the ACCC needs to realise is that they need to pull their fingers out, and instead of having a go at little people such as myself, maybe they need to have a look and investigate some of the higher end of town that are taking advantage of the smaller person.
Sure. Sure. And there was some encouraging language from the ACCC that they understand that owner drivers should get exemption in certain cases to be able to discuss race. And I'll leave that to the ACCC and Senator Sheldon's conversations, but we'll have the ACCC before us when we're in Canberra anyway to follow that up too. Yep. So, Senator McDonald, I have a raft of questions, but I'd like to hand off to you to give you an opportunity, then I'll come back up to you.
Thanks very much, Senator Stirl, and good afternoon to you all. I've got some pretty broad questions because I know you didn't put in a submission to this inquiry. Is that right? Have I got that right? Oh, you're on mute.
That's correct. I think Frank put a submission in originally, but I'm not sure about we certainly didn't.
Yeah.
All right, terrific. I wanted to talk to you about the fatigue monitoring technology that we talked about earlier today. And I want to see what your views are on using fatigue detection technology in Australia, and do you think that will assist in reducing serious crashes and injury?
From my point of view, it's probably got to help, but the bottom line is the driver has to turn it on and log on to know that they're working. So if they don't turn their phones on or whatever system we have in place is on, we're not going to know they're working. So does it make any difference in what we have now? Now they're on 2 books to get away with it. So we need to stop what occurs in this industry is, especially a long distance where, now, I'm not going to say someone moving a truck from one side of the yard to the other side of the yard during the rest makes an issue. That's probably not an issue. But what we have to stop is the driver that'll come all the way, from Adelaide to Melbourne overnight to do his delivery. Then he'll spend half the day driving around Adelaide picking up a load, and he won't count that as work time. And if he isn't logged onto a system, and it's through a phone, I think most of these, we're never going to know he's moving unless someone dictates it afterwards. So yes, it's a help, but it doesn't actually fix the real root cause of the issue, which gets down to the fact is, from our perspective, there's problems with the industry about what people get paid to do the jobs and possible jobs. So unless they're paid properly in the first place, they could maintain the trucks, and in essence, there would be no need for them to break the law to make a living.
Okay, so...
and who paid? Probably the other part is, who paid technology?
Well, the businesses I've seen today, it's been the bigger fleets. So I see it in livestock transport and horticulture transport, because that's part of world owning. I guess what you're referring to then is owner-operators, whether or not they would be able to afford to install it for themselves. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, absolutely. It's fine to have these systems in place, and I'm not going to disagree that they won't be helpful, but someone's got to pay. Now, the industry's, and it shouldn't be the main operator's got to pay. The clients, if this is a cost to the industry, that should be able to be recuperated and passed on. The clients need to put some responsibility to pay that. If we want a safer and better industry where less people are killed, less families are hurt, well, someone needs to pay. And the root cause of the issue is every study that this union's done. Well, the root cause of what happens with the industry is the fact that the rate of pay, whether you're an owner driver right up to the company, is the major cause of our deaths in industry. And if I'm quite frank, and I don't know if it's been brought up since, before they repealed the legislation, the previous legislation, this government did their own study, and it stated if they let the RRAT alone, 28% of deaths would be happen. So, bottom line, we had something in place that was going to work, was going to assist, and the root cause. By putting these band-aid measures in, it's all well and good, and it's going to assist, but it doesn't address the real problem there.
Mr. Black, as an owner-operator, do you want to comment? Is that right? You're an owner-operator?
Yes, that's correct, yes.
Could you comment on your views on the fatigue management technology, on costs, on whether or not you think that would assist with safety?
Well, you know, any extra costs on owner-operators would just be unbelievable, you know. I think the majority of owner-drivers are responsible people, right? And they manage their fatigue as best they can. But when pressures are put on, and they're, you know, we're price takers, not price makers, right? If you're not earning enough to look after your family and to look after things, it doesn't matter what sort of thing you put in place. It's going to be abused, just for the fact of surviving. Yep.
Yeah, terrific. Okay. All right, well, I might move on to apprenticeships then. We've heard evidence this morning from a couple of other people about the usefulness of having apprenticeships in the industry. Can I ask you all what your views are on the establishment of a nationwide or state-based apprenticeship that would allow young people to come into the industry and be trained up across all the facets of driving, maintenance, operations. Tell me what you think about that. Perhaps start with you, Mr. Blake.
Yeah, sure. The apprenticeship idea sounds like a great idea. But unfortunately, that would be out of the reach for most owner drivers. I remember years ago, you'd get a young fellow who would jump in a truck with dad or his brother or family friend, and they'd go. And because there was enough money in it, it was viable to sustain the pair of them. And this young guy would get hands-on training. He'd get hands-on driving experience. He'd get hands-on everything. Nowadays, that's just not possible. That's just the rates that are being paid would make it unviable for anyone to do that sort of thing. So the only one you could rely on would be the big companies, and I don't think that would be enough.
All right. Could I go back to you, Mr. Smith, or Mr. English, Mr. Drysdale, about your views on apprenticeships?
I'll make this comment. I don't think there's a problem with apprenticeships. There needs to be a better training system in our industry, because there isn't any now. But it gets down to Frank's got it right. Who's going to pay? It doesn't really matter if you're a subcontractor, owner driver, or a major company. Someone has to pay for that training. And we did have it before because there was more money in the industry. As I said in part of my speech, KNS was the perfect example, talking about the South Eastern Freeway. When you started with KNS, you didn't drive a truck up that hill until you had a licence for 3 years. So in essence, you would have had the training. They used to do it. They had the ability, and the money was the industry where you got the training, you got the skills. You came in as a forklift driver or a yard hand. You might be on the belt, sorting parcels. You learn the type of freight they have and how they deal with things. Then you might get the forklift job and you'll be loading and unloading the trucks as they come in. Then you might graduate, you might graduate to PID, like the stuff, where you'll be up delivering the small parcel freights. You start to learn that, and then you might graduate further up the chain to LD work, long distance work, or bulk truck work. We had that progression, but we don't have that now. People can go out and within 2 days have a MC licence. That's wrong. Totally wrong. You need to be trained and skilled in this industry to do that. These jobs, problem is, so many people think a truck driver is a truck driver, a bus driver is a bus driver. They're not. They're operators, and they're highly skilled people. I'm quite proud, and I'll never miss the fact that I am a truck driver. Right? And there's a lot of people can't do the job that I was doing. There's a lot of jobs that I can't do. So we don't want to lose that faith. But any training that we put in is an advantage. But someone has to pay. Now and it should not be the individual owner driver or the company. That should be coming from the client or somewhere else. If the governments are going to pay it, that should be coming from them. You guys want to add anything?
No, I think you basically said it all, really. It's like I said, where is the money going to come from? where's the money going to come from? Small operators can't afford to pay out huge sums of money because they're barely surviving as it is. So basically, the high end of town again, your big companies, and I think they'd be a bit reluctant to pay any more because they won't get a share advantage.
Right, okay. All right, look, I do acknowledge that it has been, you know, the transport industry that's kept Australia running for the last time since COVID started, and certainly those of us in regional Queensland, you know, the agricultural industry, mining industry, you know, everything's really relied on the work that transport workers have done, so we're very grateful for that. But that's all the questions from me, Chair. I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Gold. Now, a couple of questions. Frank, I want to come to you. You lived and breathed this stuff for 30 years. You were out there when I was out there too, mate. And you do touch on, like many of your adversaries who I talk to week in, week out, it's just getting worse is the message I've got coming clear. We all know the RSRT, and I've said this very clearly, from my point of view, the intent was magnificent. We had a few hurdles on the way and unfortunately a few hiccups, and it was thrown out with the baby, out with the bathwater before we could fix it rather than abolish it. So, Frank, what have we learned from that process to what you see as an independent cost recovery mechanism? What do we need to do it right this time? Because you're out there, you're an owner driver, and you're talking to many more owner drivers than anyone else is on this hookup.
Look, from my point of view, I think we had it nearly right then. I think the biggest there was a couple of tweaks that needed to happen, but obviously one of our biggest problems was that a lot of people out there didn't understand it completely, and then we had the people that really opposed it because it was going to make change in this industry, and obviously the change that's needed, and it has been needed for a lot of years. And just out of pure greed, they wanted to abolish the whole thing. And that's, as you said, that's why they threw the baby out with the bathwater. That wasn't no accidental thing. It was perpetrated by the people that didn't want that to happen. They're quite happy. So if we really got a system back that was very similar with maybe a few little tweaks, maybe in how it operated or one thing and another, I think that would be great, and I think it would go a long way to solving a lot of the problems. I mean, obviously, it's not a magic wand. It's not going to fix all of the problems of the industry, but it'd go a hell of a long way to solving a lot of the problems that are in this industry.
So, Frank, what's the buzz on the road? Is there conversations? See, the conversations I've had with a number of people who were opposed previously, and you know those connections that have been formed and remade, and there's a lot of talk going on where they've said, "Oopsie, we're no better off." But what's the vibe of the owner drivers out there?
Well, a lot of the vibe that was comes from these people, even the ones that were opposed to it. The biggest thing I get is we think we might have made a mistake. You know, we think we should have thought about it a bit more. And in what they're saying there is simply exactly what I said before. Instead of throwing the whole lot out, right, they should have looked at maybe tweaking it, but they got the wool pulled over their eyes. That's the vibe that I'm getting from a lot of the people. They just weren't happy with the way it appeared to be administered, but they were very happy with the concept of it.
Mm. Yeah, that's the vibe I got, that a lot of people were supportive of it then when it turned, and then have come back now and said, "Oops, see, how can we do this better?" All right, so and don't go away, Frank, with the time going on, because I'm going to get you to explain to us how come we have this thing in this nation called backloading.
No such animal.
Thank you. All right, what I will do is Ian, I want to come to you then. Let me ask a few questions of Peter first. And for this, for everyone who's listening, Monday I visited Queensland, or Brisbane, I was talking to the transport industry, and I was actually invited out to Lindsay's yard in Acacia Ridge. So my ears have pricked up, and I think I better ask you, Peter, were you line haul, obviously? Oh, sorry, I'm taking it you were a line haul driver? Peter?
Sorry,
Yeah, you were a line haul driver?
I was line haul and local.
Okay, so when you were line haul, was that when the issues that you had led to or was that when your issues came, or was it on the local scene, or both? I'm trying to get a picture.
It was basically on the local, mainly on local.
On local, okay, all right, that's fine. All right, so now I'll come back to, but when you talk about fatigue management, that was, you did mention the drivers were pushed. Do you mean pushed around town or pushed local, or both?
No, that was basically around. That was actual around town.
Around town? Oh, okay, all right, mate. We'll come back.
Around town.
All right, okay. And that was in contravention to South Australia's fatigue management laws?
That's correct. Yeah. When it was basically, don't worry about it. I'll fix it up. Don't clock out. And then the next day, you're allowed to go earlier.
Oh, okay. So was that a local issue? Was it just because, see, what please, I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth. I have conversations and have done many years with many transport operations. Some transport operations are magnificently trying to do the right thing, then they'll have a rogue manager. Was this a case of a rogue individual in South Australia, or was it, did you see it as company-wide?
I haven't been to Coffs Harbour and the different companies. It's only purely, I'm talking about South Australia.
Yep, no, that's fine. And the reason I asked that, because we had a similar issue with the exploitation of Australia's visa systems with a very reputable company who had a rogue operation in Brisbane. You all know what I'm talking about there with KNF. All right, so come back now. I'll come to you, Ian.
Yep.
Now, you have said that the federal government needs to take action, I think was your words. And you were talking about some forced legislation. So I'll ask you on behalf of the South Australian Northern Territory branch there, what would that look like? What is it that you would actually see as the fix?
Well, I think we've all said it. The RSRT was the fix. It wasn't perfect, but it was the fix. And historically, transport gets it right in the end. Historically, it might have been right in the first place, but transport would have got it right in the end. But the bottom line, there's got to be some regulation put in the industry, because there is none. There's nothing to protect anybody in South Australia unless you're an employee, when you've got awards and agreements to apply by. But even then, they undercut them and there's an underpayment of wages. So there needs to be some regulation, and something like the RSRT is the answer. And the bottom line is the clients need to be held accountable then. It's the clients that are the root cause of our issue. The clients, quite frankly, if Audi, Woolworths, Coles, you look at retail, if they could do transport cheaper, they would do it, because they're a profit-driven company. And if you look here, if I talk about Coles in Adelaide, they virtually run that transport company since before Cole took it over and DJ Whiteman's had the contract, because he went broke. So they went in and they run the business for Whiteman's to get him out of the poo, because they said him broke. So they know the cost of running transport. They contract it out because they know they can type whoever it is, whether it's the owner driver, whether it's the major company, whether it's the smaller companies that have got 10 trucks, they know. They get them in and they can say, if you want to keep this contract, you're going to have to show 3 million, 1 million, might be 100,000 to maintain it. And that has an impact on that business, right? And the only companies that really can truly afford to take the message hit is the Tolls and the TNTs, the Limpolks and Star Treks, because they have the revenue. But the smaller companies can't. Right. And we see catastrophes that happen in the industry. We see what happens, and it's not stopping, it's getting worse.
So, Ian and Frank, both to you both. So we've got what I've taken from this morning is that there's two very clear distinct paths. One is the exploitation, there's a couple. One is the pressure is driven from the top of the supply chain down, which we know that. These are the economic decision makers. But we have a dual effect. We have, and to you both, we have where the major user of the transport pulls out those three most insulting words: sharpen your pencil, and it flows down to decent men and women in the trucking industry who are our employers. And then they are expected to get savings from wage drivers. But then we've got the other side of the equation, still the same yard, but on the other side of the fence is while the rate of being driven down, the expectation of the wage rate, while we have no enforcement powers coming from Fair Work ombudsman who are asleep at the wheel, but also, Frank, from your point of view, if a company, you can't, I would assume, because the owner-drivers are expected to tumble their rates down as well. And would I be right, Frank, in assuming that you don't have the ability, and I'm defending the employers here too, not the top, defending the transport companies, you don't have the luxury that some may have on the big fleets of having that buying power, insurance, tyres, repairs, and new trucks every 2 years and all this sort of stuff. So please come in. I think that's where we're at. Yeah. Right. So when we talk about the going up the chain, what would going up the chain look like? What, do we whack them on the head with a baseball bat, or are we talking about fines? Are we talking about chucking them in jail? Do we talk about giving them an opportunity, smack on the wrist, don't do it again? What's your views there? Because we know the problem. We just got to, we want you to guide us on what that would look like.
I'll speak initially, Glenn. From my perspective, we need a body or some legislation that enables some enforceable rights. So if we have found that a company, a client at the top of the supply chain is paying a rate that's unsustainable and unsafe, that there's ability of somebody to make an order against that particular company, that they must up their ante and play the ball properly and pay a decent rate for whatever it is. So, and it's enforceable where we've got somewhere to go, like the RRAT was doing. The RRAT really was an arm of Fair Work Australia, which gave it the same powers to make orders so that people could go there for a reasonable, simple cost and have someone investigate their contracts, whether it's an owner-driver or a company contract, with a client, and have the ability to order that client to do this and that. To make sure that it was safe, and that was the answer. Yes, there will always be stumbling blocks, and there'll always be some things that we get wrong. But the bottom line is, there's no protection for anybody in South Australia or the Northern Territory, regardless who you are, other than to say, well, I'm not doing that job. Whether you're a company driver or that's all you can do.
And Frank?
Yeah, well, whatever system's put in place needs to be enforceable, and there needs to be penalties for people that don't adhere to it. Because obviously, as we know, unless something is enforceable, it's not worth nothing. You need to put an enforceable legislation in with severe penalties for people that breach that, because at the end of the day, let's face it, they breach that, they're putting people's lives at risk. Right? Ultimately, as it comes down the chain, it puts people's lives at risk. So there need to be pretty serious consequences for anything that's enforceable for people that don't adhere to this legislation.
Right. Thanks, Frank. Now, also on this one, gentlemen, this has come across, this flows across my desk. It doesn't get, a lot of people don't talk about it too often in these environments because we don't have enough time. But what I have established, and trust me, I've been up and down the road here a couple of times in WA doing a couple of road trains, driving up and down. Wage theft in this industry, and I'm not making this up, is one of the greatest sleeping monsters. So, am I on the wrong tangent here? Because when I talk about wage theft, I have got numerous examples of agreements that have been paid, kilometre rates to drivers. And a kilometre rate's great if you're going from point A to point B and you're doing it in the time of day where it doesn't incur penalty rates as per the award and all sorts of stuff. what has been told to me very clearly, that is the biggest load of crap. There is not point A to point B. There are so many kilometres being driven that are not being paid. And what came out of one of these inquiries in Albury from the drivers themselves, our owner drivers, and Frank, you may wish to make some comment here too, of the amount of times they're sitting at, and I'll name them, Woolworths, Coles, Aldi's, no pay. You've got to move the bucket of nuts and bolts up the line, because if you don't move it, everyone will go around you, but you don't get paid. And the drivers have said very clearly, Senator, if we put down that we need to be paid there, we won't be able to make the extra 2-3 hours tonight on our logbooks. We're breaking the law. Boy, oh boy, have a go, Frank.
Yeah, well, obviously, kilometre rates need to be wiped out. You know, everything should be paid at an hourly rate. You know, people go to work in every other industry, they get paid hourly rates. And that's the only way you can justify it. If we get held up on the road, that's not our fault. You know, we've got to make that up elsewhere. Right? Now, we're even speaking, say, for drivers, if a driver's getting paid at a kilometre rate, he's got to make that up so he gets a decent wage at the end of the week, so he can pay his rent, food and all the rest of it. So the kilometre rate really needs to go straight out the window, and everything needs to be paid at an hourly rate. Maybe running costs when it comes for an owner-driver can be calculated at a kilometre rate. Again, we go back to the RSRT, and that's how that was calculated. We had an hourly plus a kilometre rate. The hourly rate took care of the labour side of it. The kilometre rate took care of the running cost of the vehicle.
Right, Ian, in terms of flight theft, mate, how's things in South Australia? Is it only just me getting the wrong info from every other state?
No, we'll have people coming in day after day after day with issue after issue after issue. The issues that we do have is typically transport workers aren't good record keepers, so it's all up in their head and they know exactly to the last cent what they've been underpaid, but to actually prove it, because all the documentation and everything like that's gone. Plus, a lot of the time, what they've done's been illegal anyway, and they've been forced to do it. Is there, right? So certainly, I don't disagree with Frank around kilometre rates. They've got to go. You know, he's got it in one. But we need a system, regardless of what you are, that enables whoever it is doing the work, from the top, the starter to the bottom, can get full cost recovery in the first place. And they can base the wage component around a minimum standard, which is, you know, we have the award, but the award's not high enough, higher than that, so that when they are when they do quote for these jobs, you know, something like a RSRT, that's what they're going to rely on when they do that. So if it costs you, you know, $300 worth of fuel and maintenance and registration and insurance to do that particular job, that's there the start. If it's 10 hours work, well, you give them the 10 hours. You charge for 10 hours. Then you put your profit on top. Then we'll have a fair industry. We don't have that now, because they'll say, we don't care. We want that. Well, the bloke down the road will do it for $300 less. And, oh, shit, well, I suppose I better do it. And that's wrong. So it's got to be enforceable. It's got to be reasonably simple, because we are, after all, simple people. All right, keep it simple. Stupid people understand and get and move forward. If there is a criticism of the RSRT, it was probably the complexity of the legislation. So whatever we have in place needs to be quite simple, quite understandable, where people can make decisions correctly and basically, and the industry can move forward, and we will see the reduction in everything that we're talking about today, the death, the mental health, everything that's bad about this industry won't all go away, but most of it go away, and we'll have a much better society. Yes, it's going to cost a little bit more to get your parcel delivered. Absolutely. But so it bloody should, right? You know, we shouldn't be, we become a society where we want to buy the cheapest, not the best. We've got to change that, and we need to have standards that everything we're doing is the best, because that way we're all much better off.
I think one thing on that, Ian, I would say is I had this conversation many times where a few smarties have said to me, you'll put the cost of living up for, this community or that community. I'd say, no, we'll probably put it back to where it was in 1970. And if that means that one banana from the top of Queensland to the markets in Adelaide is going to cost 1 cent more, so the truck drivers safer and the transport companies sustainable, viable and profitable, God help us, they're not on the wrong planet, but I don't think so. On saying that, I just want to, just in summarising the acts of the time, that there's a truck driver from Queensland who I have a lot of respect for, many truck drivers, but Trevor Warner, and I remember listening to Trevor once when he was saying to someone that he can earn $2,000 a week, and they said, gee whiz, that's great money, $2,000 a week as an employee. And he said, hey, hang on, it's not bad money. He said, but hey, I'm doing 2 jobs, I'm working 76 hours a week. You could have had a big drop. You in the transport industry think that's normal.
No, that's right. Look, I'll say when we talk about contracts, and this is a big, and I'll talk about Holden's, which you're no longer here. It was allegedly with Holden's, if you're a contractor with Holden's, each year of the contract you got less money. Now, I don't understand that, because the cost of running that contract is more and more each year, because wages go up, fuel goes up, electricity goes up, everything goes up there. But because you got better at it, then you wanted to give it back to them. The new road, when they put that road in going past Gawler out to Kapunda, they took money off the truck companies because there was less distance to travel. And it was better because the road was better. Well, they didn't put any money in for the road. We all did. So it's wrong. Too much power the client has. The power has to be shifted back where it's balanced and it's fair.
Well, I think one thing on that conversation around the nation, most people I'm talking to, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet on that. And just quickly, I do want to say to George, for the COVID stuff, it really has highlighted the perils of the bus drivers. And thank you for your service through COVID. But what I do just ask, you don't have safety screens and all that in South Australian buses?
We have a water safety screen at the moment, but totally insufficient for today's antisocial behaviour, and given the screen that's in our buses, including the new buses released to the bus contractors as recently as this week, the doors are unsatisfactory. The system that is being retrofitted in the current new buses is just unsatisfactory for what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. We still can be punched, we still can be spat on. The one where I said one of my female co-workers was threatened with a pair of scissors. That bus has only done 2,000 kilometres. It's a brand new bus with a security door. What sort of security door allows someone to reach around and put a pair of scissors to your throat?
Yeah. Yes, I get that. Thanks very much. So look, in summarising, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We could go on all day, but unfortunately we couldn't. Frank, thanks very much for inviting us into your bedroom.
No worries.
It wasn't missed on me, mate. I see that. and stay safe, mate, and look forward to catching up with you, to everyone else. Safe Christmas, and look forward to seeing you in the new year. Okay?
See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. All right, now we will move to